Now we have some minutes scheduled here for questions and answers. So, and I am going to give preference in people who haven't spoken thus far, because I think we want the range of voices from the convention. So I am going to just say that at the beginning, I know, Keith, you want to get in, but you spoke a few moments ago. Yeah.
Hi, Gillian Van Turnhout. I just have some questions for Robert. Thanks for the presentation. You said that most countries have a 5-year term, and it's in those countries I just have a few questions. Does their governments normally run in a 5-year term? So are you talking about EU countries or non-EU countries? Do they traditionally link their presidential election to other elections, whether it's national or local or others? And do they have a limit on the number of terms that they have? Is it the two? So,
thank you. Yeah.
So,
sorry, we'll answer this one first, Alban. Yeah.
In most cases, the government, or the length of the legislature's term is 5 years as well. That would be standard. I mean, it could even be 4. So therefore, the length of the presidential term and the legislative term is basically the same in most of those 5-year countries. There aren't very many countries that align a lot of elections together, presidential elections with other elections. In fact, it would be quite normal for there to be a presidential election and then later in the same year even to have local elections. So it's not unheard of. I couldn't give you the figures off the top of my head. I can go and find them out, but it's not as frequent as the 5-year term itself. So it doesn't happen very often. Most countries do have term limits for their presidents. And so even the countries that have a 5-year presidential term will very often have 2 terms for their president. So the maximum would be 10 years. So again, Ireland has a 2-term limit in that sense. So Ireland would be standard if it adopted effectively a 10-year maximum for president.
Okay, thank you. Alban?
Thank you very much, Chairperson Alban McGuinness, Belfast. I think one of the determinants in all this is whether or not you have an executive president. We do not have an executive president. And I think it's important when we're looking at the lists of presidents here, I know it might be a difficult task to do immediately, but to determine who is an executive president and who is effectively a figurehead president, a head of state. So I think that's an important element in determining this. It may well be inconsequential if you're simply a figurehead president as opposed to an executive president. Certainly if you're an executive president, I think the term of office would have to be much less than 7 years.
I actually have those figures on my computer at the back. I can give them to you if you want, but just I think you have on your briefing document at the back there in the appendix which countries do have 7 years, 6 years, 5 years. And of the countries that have 7 years, then Israel and Italy have figurehead presidents. They have non-executive presidents in that way. So in some senses, the most comparable countries with a 7-year presidency would have a similar type of presidency to the Irish presidency, i.e. one that is not an executive president. In terms of the countries with 6 years, then again, Austria and Finland, which would be the ones that are most like the Irish case, again, they're non-executive presidents. They don't have very many powers at all. In fact, the Finnish president now has very few powers. So again, the longer the presidential term, certainly in a European context and outside, if you look at some of those countries with 6-year presidents, some of them in Latin America, I mean, they're presidential systems. They're very different types of presidencies completely. The countries that are comparable to Ireland, then yes, they tend to have longer terms. But also, I think, I would say that of countries with 5-year presidential terms, then there's quite a lot of non-executive presidents there. So just having a 5-year term doesn't mean that you're going to have an executive presidency. In fact, countries like Montenegro, Serbia, Slovenia, Croatia, they have presidents that would be even weaker in some senses than the Irish president. For example, they don't even have the power to send a bill to have its constitutionality determined. So having a 5-year presidency doesn't guarantee that the president is going to be more powerful or that there's going to be an executive presidency. But yeah, it's certainly the case that those with longer terms tend to be non-executive presidents that are comparable to Ireland anyway.
Okay. Any other questions? James.
James Bannon here in Lumford. You spoke about holding our president to account. Holding our president to account for what? Because our president has been constrained very much in what he or she can do. And should we not be looking at broadening the duties of the president in the European context? I mean, when have we had a president who addressed the Irish Parliament, for instance?
I think the last time was actually 2000. I think Mayor McAleese gave addressed the Dáil, I think, in 2000. But I think, I mean, in some senses, it's for you to decide what you think about what the powers of the president should be. But I think, you know, there's at least worth thinking about the scenario where the president is unpopular, where the president is controversial for whatever reason. There are ways of impeaching the president in a legal way, but that would be almost unheard of. But if the president was a controversial figure that had been voted in, then if you were to reduce the term to 5 years, then at least you'd increase the opportunity for people to be able to pass judgment on that president sooner than would otherwise be the case.
Okay. Did I see a hand? But, okay.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Regina. Robert, I have 2 quick questions for you, please. Do you have the percentage turnout of the last 3 presidential elections, please? And also, is there any evidence to tell us what's the basis of how we currently pick our presidents? Like, it's not necessarily along party lines. Do we, as a nation, pick them because they're a nice person or because they've got educational experience or, you know, business experience? Is there evidence as to why we pick the presidents that we currently pick?
I don't have the turnout figures off the top of my head. I think it was 53% at the last election, but I'm not sure. I can go back and check, but it's I can find out that information. In terms of, I think you mean why people vote for the candidate, not why a candidate is selected in the first place, but yeah, the vote. There are all sorts of reasons. I mean, there's not one overwhelming reason, and it can be some people will vote along purely partisan lines. If you identify with a particular party and a candidate from your party is standing for election, then you will vote for that candidate, almost whatever they say. Some people will vote along the same lines as they would at a general election. So it would be along economic lines. If the economy is going badly, then they might express that in terms of a vote for the presidency as well. But I think there is, in a sense, in a presidential election, there is this sense of the types of qualities a candidate have, and that comes out in debates. There is a proportion of people who, in addition to all those other things, who will be looking at the personal factor more than perhaps at some other elections. But having said that, of course, you know, even at Dáil elections in constituencies, the personality factor or the personal factor is very important too, so expressed in a different way, certainly. But nonetheless, you know, there is a sense in which personal factors come into the presidency. I can, again, later on, if you want, I can give you some slightly more exact figures, but that would be, I think, the overall sense.
Thank you. Yep.
Hi, my name is Sean Marshall. I just find it's very hard to debate on this topic when you don't really know the roles of the president or the extension to his powers or what he actually generally does on a day-to-day basis. So I just want to get that point across.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, maybe, Robert, you might give the essential aspects of the presidential role, particularly as set out in the Constitution.
So, as we heard, there's a non-executive president, in effect, which really means that there's a figurehead presidency. The presidency has very, very few powers indeed. And indeed, of the powers that the president has, most of them are very minor, dealing with elements of the legislative process that very rarely, if ever, occur. And of the powers that are perhaps more important, the most important one will be the ability to refuse the request to dissolve the Dáil. And that power has never been used. It has come up, but it's never been used. So that's a presidential power that does exist in the Constitution that has simply never come up. The main presidential power that does get used in terms of the Constitution is after the advice of the Council of State to send a bill to the Supreme Court to look at its constitutionality. And that power has been used over time. I can give you the exact figures, I think. That power to send a bill to the Constitutional Court has been used 15 times since 1938, 7 of which have been since 1990. So even that power isn't used very frequently. So you are looking at a figurehead. So therefore, I guess what that means is that for the presidency, rather than looking at an institution that's wielding power or exercising power in that way, you're really looking at a figure whose influence comes from being a figurehead, a spokesperson for various groups, a person who can sell Ireland abroad, both culturally and economically as well, in terms of trade missions. And some people would argue that having a non-executive president, somebody who can speak as sort of an impartial person, can help in that way. And there have been times, when, particularly in terms of Mary Robinson, Mary McAleese, in terms of the North, when presidents maybe have been able to make certain gestures, been able to do certain things that it might have been difficult for other types of politicians to make. So we really aren't talking about a president with a lot of powers, and even the powers there aren't used very often. But I think it's not an institution that should be ignored or forgotten or disrespected in that way either.
Okay. Is there one more question here? Okay.
Well, it was just in relation to that last point that Professor made there. Like the thing of I'm not so sure I would agree with the idea that the role is largely to do with being a figurehead and, to promote Ireland and so on. Like, surely the most important role of our president is that they're a protector of the Constitution. And for example, the last time I remember when the president referred an act to the Supreme Court, it was in relation to taking money from elderly residents in nursing homes illegally, and it was to retrospectively legalise that. So the president, in effect, protected elderly residents from having money illegally taken from them. Their rights would have been infringed if she hadn't referred to the bill. So I just think it's very important that we remember how important the role is in regards protecting our constitutional rights.
Thank you. Well, that's, I think, a very fair comment in the context of the convention. Robert, would you like to comment on that?
I mean, it maybe sounds as though I didn't agree with you, but actually I do agree with you. I mean, I think it's probably no coincidence that, as I was saying earlier, I mean, the power that has been used the most is the power to refer bills to the Supreme Court, which is exactly, as you say, in that sense, the safeguard of the Constitution. So absolutely, I think we agree with each other, basically.
Okay. We've reached the allotted time